My name is Ross Beaty. I love gold. It's the one metal that has been valuable in every single society on Earth through all history. And my bet is that it's going to continue to have that value.
Ross Beaty, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Look, I want to get into everything, what you're doing now with Pan American Silver, Altera Power. I mean, the truth is you're probably one of the most influential people in mining in the world today. But,
I don't think so.
Well, you don't think so. A lot of other
I hope not.
A lot of other people do. But before we get to that and about your perspective on gold, I want to take you back a little bit and talk about the boy that has become Ross Beaty. Tell me about your upbringing.
Tormented individual.
What kind of a childhood did you have?
I had a pretty good childhood. You know, I was a pretty hyperactive kid, and my mother dealt with that by throwing me out of the house and saying, you know, go out and play and come back to eat and then go out again. And so I played outside a lot and really became a lover of nature from a very young age. I liked being outdoors. I like being outdoors today. And really that's informed most of my story as to where I got a job, how I worked, what I'm doing, you know, how I love travel and so on. So I grew up in Vancouver, and I wanted a job that would take me outside. So it was a natural thing to go into geology. I loved everything about geology, the study of the earth, volcanoes, earthquakes, mountain building, and from the standpoint of looking for a job, I thought it had great prospects to give me a good job in the mining industry, or coal, or oil, or academia, quite frankly, or government. And I was naturally directed towards industry because I'm also at heart an entrepreneur. I'm not very patient. I'm not suitable really in most companies as a sort of an employee person. I don't suffer fools easily.
Was there someone who informed that interest?
Well, my father probably. He was an entrepreneur in the logging or in the lumber industry. But strange enough, my two brothers aren't. So it was just that's probably where I got my entrepreneur gene. But I really always wanted to work for myself since I was young. Always wanted to work for myself, build my own companies, see how I could do. And that's exactly what I did. I spent the 70s going to school, a couple of degrees in geology, a degree in law, more or less as a hobby. I then started my first company as soon as I finished school, Beaty Geological, a little contract geology company. Worked hard on that, worked in New Zealand, in Canada, the United States, went to Africa, Sierra Leone, Liberia specifically. And then about 1985, I started my first public company because I really wanted to have that ability to find something that would be owned enough by me that it would create a retirement fund. It wouldn't just be a bread and butter business of selling time. So through the 80s, I really worked all over the place, all over the world, in fact. And we had because I had my contract company, the public company, I would joint venture all of the deposits that were held by the public company, do the work in the private company, and then a third party would pay the bills in the joint venture. But then it became complicated and full of conflicts of interest, so I bought myself. It was my first deal. The public company bought my contract company, and it was all for one and one for all. And I'd got my family and my friends all into the public company. The first one I had was called Equinox Resources. And that was just a lot of hard work, a lot of mistakes, but magically we found a gold mine. We focused on gold and discovered a really rich deposit in Nevada called Rosebud. And in 1994, Hecla bought Equinox for about $107 million, and I was able to exit with a big fortune and really redeploy that into starting Pan American Silver, a couple of other companies. And then it was just one after the other, and I guess today I've started 14 companies altogether and still have 4 that are public today. Pan American is one, a small gold company in Brazil, gold company intended to be a gold producer in Brazil called Anfield Gold. Really great exploration play for gold again in Ecuador called Lumina Gold. And then I have a clean energy company called Altera Power. So it's been a wonderful journey. All sorts of companies that have been sold and happy endings for many, many shareholders. It's been a huge amount of fun, but all the way through, I can really say it's the threads of the success are wanting to be outside a lot and then getting a job that took me outside and learning about the business from really the ground up, the sense of kind of impatience and a certain amount of promotional skill, salesmanship, of being able to sell stories and sell dreams, bringing shareholders in, but more importantly, making them money. Once you start once you make people money, they'll bet on you again. And I've had an inordinate amount of luck in my career. I will say just pure blind luck. Discovery is a lot of luck involved. Getting your timing right is a lot of luck. I've had some good calls, and I hope to have more good calls to go. But really, I have to say the one thing that I can really count on is that I've had a lot of luck, and that's got me as where I've ended up as much as anything else. Certainly, you work hard, you get great people who work with you, and I've been blessed with some wonderful people in my career that have worked with me. But all that hard work. And all the money in the world, it doesn't necessarily bring financial success, but I've been able to get lucky, and that's really made it. And it's been lucky again and again.
Okay, so I want to take you back a little bit again, because this is I mean, obviously you have one of the most fascinating stories out there. Was there a decision way back in your 20s? Many people, decisions are, they look back and they're like one or two key decisions that they made in their life that really informed where they've gone. For you, was there a moment or decisions like that?
Sure, there really have been, and I will call those epiphanies. And really, epiphanies are real for me, and they're real for friends of mine. They don't happen very often, but when they happen, it really is like a light bulb turning on in your head. I had an epiphany to do a law degree instead of do a PhD in geology. Well, that was a carefully thought decision, and I think it was sort of the right one, even though I hated law, just hated it. I just reacted against the whole principles of how they teach law in schools and what it represents. But it was great training for me versus, say, a PhD. So that was a good thing. The second was in 1982, I was in Vancouver looking for opportunity. I had my little company. But I had a big offer from a major company to work for them as a career geologist. And I said no to that. I stayed with my little company that was just starting out. It was a terrible market, bottom of the market in 1982, you might remember. And as it turned out, it was a great time to start. It's a good time in the cycle if you start at the bottom.
Why did you not say yes to that?
I just wanted to be my own.
I
wanted to be my own man. I wanted to have my own world and stay true to my desire to be self-made and an entrepreneur. And as it turned out, it worked out. I would say another epiphany happened when I started Pan American Silver. I realized that the company that bought my first gold company, Hecla, was trading as if it were a silver company, but it had almost no silver production, silver leverage at that point in time. It was a gold or industrial metals company, and that meant there was a market for silver companies. If I could build one, I knew investors would come, and that's exactly what happened. I got it wrong in terms of what I thought the silver price was going to do. We started Pan American when the silver price was less than $5 an ounce. I thought it would be $10 an ounce at least in the next, say, 6 years. Turned out in 2001 it was back down to $4 at an all-time low in real terms. So that was wrong. But then, of course, happily, 2002 it took off again and it went to $50 an ounce, and that was that meant Pan American went from $3 to $45 a share. It was a pretty nice gain. So it worked out in the end, but it took a while. And then I had another epiphany back in 2002 when I looked at the copper price and the 50-year trends in copper, which was a sine curve with increasing amplitude. And you could literally put a straight line through the bottoms and a straight line through the tops. And we were trading in 2002 at the very bottom or even below the all-time trend line. Well, in a cyclical world like we have with metals, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think the price is likely to go up. And it's probably going to go up to where the trend line would take at least to that. Well, it turned out it went twice as high over the next few years because of this amazing thing that's going on in China. And that was yet another opportunity. It was sort of coinciding with seeing that sine curve of the copper price, the long-term copper price. I went to China as head of the Silver Institute to try to get them to try to get the Chinese to stop dumping silver on world markets back in 2002. And I just anybody who went to China then, and quite frankly going now, it's just, you just have your mouth open at what's going on in China. It was so obvious. They were creating this monster demand for metals of all kinds, And the bellwether metal for world economies is copper. It's the Dr. Copper, they call it. It really is a barometer of global industrial production. And clearly to me, that was the metal to be in. I went around and accumulated a whole pile of copper deposits at the bottom of the market and ended up selling them all as the copper price went up and the metal market improved and the valuations improved, and that was another home run deal. So that was another epiphany, and they're just wonderful things when they come, and you know, they don't come that often, which is probably a good thing.
Who do you think was the most influential person in your life to date?
Well, I guess I'd have to say my father. I mean, that's kind of a pat answer, but he was a good guy. The problem with my dad was he died when I was only 21. He died, or 22. He died of a car accident in Latin America when he was 55. So I lost that mentor, I suppose. And after that, I can honestly say I think I made all my own mistakes. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes, but somehow at the end of the day, as I say, luck, la fortuna, as Tom Calvin likes to call it. It went my way again and again, and I guess my screw-ups were masked by the success I had that offset the mistakes, and ultimately the result was a happy story. Now that I'm an old geezer, like I am.
What do you think? Maybe what were some of the things that your father did that created the man that's sitting across from me right now? Growing up, you said he was the most influential person in your life. Were there moments where he?
Yeah, when I was young, you know, he was a great person to me, because the thing that he did that I thought, you know, demonstrated that was possible is he built a successful lumber business, forest products business. It wasn't huge; it was mid-sized, without screwing people. He was a very honest and a very righteous man, and he did it through hard work, and it demonstrated to me you don't have to screw people. You don't have to cut corners. You don't have to be crooked. You can actually build businesses through hard work and diligence, telling people straight goods, and I feel that that's what I've done in my life, and so I've been true to his style of business. Of course, in this business, in the promotional area, you have to tell stories. You have to kind of, you know, try to paint a pretty optimistic picture in order to capture investors' capital,
sure,
and then hope you're going to be proven right. Well, there's an art to that, but and I think I had that art. It's not in everybody's genes to be able to tell those kind of stories and create excitement. You've got to create excitement. You've got to go for big projects that have big upside. That's maybe something you learn early on, is to try to go for scale, because big projects deliver big returns. Little projects have all the hassle of big ones and just don't generate that return. So those kind of things you learn as you go. When you're involved with public companies where you're using other people's money, you actually have to deliver at the end of the day, or you'll never get a second chance. And that's why it's true, you know, if the ducks are quacking, you feed them. But to a point, because if you take too much money, destroy your share structure, and then fail to succeed at what your target is, it's really hard to go back to the well.
You mentioned earlier that you really like people who bet on you, and then, you know, obviously they see success. What was maybe the most satisfying episode of that for you? It
was actually when I sold my first company, Equinox. We went for 9 years. I had a wonderful, you know, fan base. I mean, I had all the newsletter writers who really liked what I was doing. Rick Rule was a big backer, Bob Bishop, Mark Skousen, Adrian Day, you know, just a great list of wonderfully supportive people in those days. And they you know, they'd write something in the newsletter, and then I delivered. I, you know, made this big gold discovery. We had almost another huge one. And the last day of trading of Equinox was an all-time high. So everybody looked good. I had this great loyal group of shareholders at that point who, you know, had sort of suffered with me through the ups and downs of the market between '85 and 1994, but they all were happy at the end, and they were loyal. And then when I started Pan American Silver, they just piled right in, and they created a massive premium of value over the real asset base that we had, and I used that premium to finance, to build up an asset, to sort of backfill with an asset base that allowed us to actually thrive and prosper. And that was really satisfying, and it was incredibly helpful to have that premium that I could use to acquire other assets with.
Okay, I want to change gears here a little bit. What would you say was your relationship to money growing up, and how has that informed how you handle it today?
To money? Well, I've always been very Scottish. My mother was, my mother and father both lived through the Depression, but particularly my mother was very frugal, and she brought us up in a true Scottish tradition of really squeezing your pennies, and I thought that was just a fine way to grow up. The other side of things was I was a nature lover, so I loved hiking and climbing and camping, and to this day, my happiest time on a vacation, quite frankly, is living in a tent on a kayak trip or a canoe trip with my wife, sitting on a beach in a beautiful spot and cooking my own food on a campfire. I mean, that's my idea of wealth. So I don't need a lot of money. I never have, and I never will. It's not that important to me. It's a metric. Yeah, of course, it's good for the ego, and it's a nice thing to measure against other people. It's great. But I have to say, and I like making money, but I don't spend it. I just don't spend it. So I've created a foundation where all the money I've made is going to go into the foundation, and the foundation is 100% dedicated to the preservation of the environment and protection of biodiversity. That's it in a nutshell. So, that's what I'm working for right now. Every penny I'm making right now is going right into that foundation, and I love making it. I also love giving it away.
Okay, so that's it. Your perspective on money is interesting. Now, what about your perspective on gold?
Oh, well, very different subject. So I don't own gold myself as an insurance or as a hedge, but that's because most of my business assets today, meaning Pan American Silver and Anfield Alumina Gold, they are already leveraged to the gold price and the silver price. Silver is gold. Silver and gold are really the same for this discussion anyway. So I have an awful lot of gold exposure already. And because I'm convinced that gold is going to maintain its value and increase its value relative to any currency, any currency at all in the world, I just think it's a fabulous metal to be exposed to. That's how I get my exposure. The average person who doesn't have that kind of luck to be able to be involved in a business that has, say, well, one of the companies, Lumina Gold, has 15 million ounces of gold in its resources in the ground, which it owns. That's pretty good exposure there. If you don't have that exposure, you should buy coins and buy bars and stick that away, and it's never going to go down in value, I don't think, over the long term, and it's going to potentially offer some tremendous security should you ever need to call on that. I like gold for the fact that you can't print it, you can't burn it. It is beautiful. It's magic. It's magical to me, but it's as I said earlier, it's the very metal that humans have loved for millennia. In every culture, whether it's tribal or sophisticated, any religion in the world, they've always loved gold. It's just got some magic to it, and it will always have that magic.
Who introduced you to gold? The concept of it.
It would have been during my first public company, Equinox. I mean, I'm a geologist. I'm not a financial guy.
Sure.
I never had that background. But let's just say gold is one of those things, the more you know it, the more you like it. And so I just loved looking for it and mining it and trading it. And I used to carry around a little tola bar. A little tola bar is a little wafer of gold that it's a weight in India and the Middle East. And it's kind of like a gold ring. It just feels good. It just felt good. The heft and the softness, the heat. It's a very conductive metal of heat. That's what's magical about gold.
Okay, so in broad terms, how do you think the modern world interacts with gold now, given what we're seeing?
It's a little bit more complicated today, to be honest, Jonathan, because of the cryptocurrency market. That's the one thing that's just niggling away at my brain about whether that can possibly compete with gold as a kind of a long-term store of value that governments can't dick around with. and it's got some kind of fundamental value. But the more I look at cryptocurrencies and the more I see what's happening with internet regulation, and I'm just worried about it. I can't give you any facts particularly, but it's just a gut feeling. If something's ephemeral or it's based on ether, which is nothing, it could, like a balloon, blow up and it just disappears and you can't see it. And so you cannot have that happen with gold. It's a metal, part of the periodic table. Gold will always be gold. It doesn't rust, it doesn't degrade. Most of the gold that's ever been mined is still around in vaults. And I cannot say that's likely with cryptocurrencies. So it's the one thing that I think has the potential to, in some markets, particularly for young people, they'll buy a Bitcoin instead of gold as a store of value. I'm going to suggest that that may be a unfortunate decision over the medium term, but I haven't got anything other than a gut feeling to base that on. Apart from that, there's nothing else. There's nothing else that substitutes for gold.
Based on all that, then, what value will gold have in the world moving forward? How do you see that interaction?
Sure. Well, let's always remember as well that for every metal price forecast, you have both demand and supply, and they really do figure. The difference between oil and gas today, they've segregated in value because the fundamentals are completely different. The difference between coal and thermal coal and metallurgical coal have diverged because they are different commodities, different demand, different supply. And so you have to look when you try to figure out what gold's going to do, you have to look at what the demand and the supply fundamentals are. Now, gold is unique because 95% of the gold that is, you could say, supply is in vaults. And if that gold is mobilized, it has the worst fundamentals of any metal, the worst. But if that supply stays in the vault and is not for sale, it has the best because it has declining supply and increase in demand, which is a wonderful formula for higher prices. The truth is the gold price and actually the silver price to a large degree, not quite the same degree because of silver's industrial uses, they're set at the margin by investment demand. Investment demand is the dominant demand factor in gold, almost the dominant one in silver. So it's the swings of money in and out of gold as investment demand that really govern the price. And my bet is that given the fact that we all know that this world is a cyclical world, that there are forces one day that cause investment swings into gold or out of gold or into any market or out of that market, it's a reality that there are cyclical trends. It's also an underlying reality that paper currencies are being printed at an enormous rate by every government in the world and have no underlying fundamental backing. They could be printed to any degree they wish. And that devalues the world of paper currency. A little bit of money, a little bit of that paper currency that's so easy to print, going into something hard, like gold, will have a very large impact on the gold price because the scale of the money and the scale of the increase in the money supply is so big that just a small amount of that, for any reason, into gold, because of fear, because of concern of devaluation, any of those concerns into gold is going to make a heck of a lot of difference in the gold price, and in direct connection to the silver price. So the converse is true too. A little bit of money coming out of the ETF drops, which is really investment supply. It's a proxy for investment demand. Will affect the gold price very significantly. My bet is, though, over the long term, there's more money that's going to go into gold than it's likely to come out of it, especially from today on. So I'm quite bullish on the gold price. I'm sure it will exceed its previous high of whatever it was, 1850. In the next I don't know how many years, but in the foreseeable future, I really do. Maybe in the next few years. And so I'm bullish on the gold price. I'm building a couple of gold companies. I've got tons of personal investments in the gold space, gold equities, all the way from Gold Corp down to all kinds of junior explorers. It's a metal that's easy for small companies to produce. The market loves it. You get a premium on your net asset value typically because of course you're being bought by companies by people, investors who believe the gold price is going to go up, and it's just a great thing to be exposed to.
So a final question for you then. There is a sentiment out there that says that at least over the last few years, there's been this decoupling of the gold price and what we see geopolitically happening in the world. What would you say to people that talk about that issue?
Yeah, that's really valuing gold as a fear play. And I would say that's been discredited for years. I mean, years and years. Everybody says, well, as soon as there's something that causes fear in the world, people pile into gold. That's no longer true. It hasn't been true for decades. So I say the gold price doesn't have to have any of that in it. There's an element of it. If there's mayhem and chaos, some people buy gold, but the smart money doesn't. The smart money buys gold because it's a store of value, and it's concerned about the devaluation of other forms of currency.
Mr. Beaty, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.